fossa, posterior cranial fossa, and then here you're looking at the petrous portion of the temporal bone right here, and then over in this area here, as we turn around here, we see the rest of the temporal bone, squamosal portion, mastoid process, external auditory meatus, and then here's the zygomatic process. So every one of these features I just pointed out, every one of those is part of the temporal bone. And so you know from our discussions that when we talk about the external ear, the middle ear, and internal ear, we're talking about the temporal bone. All of those are associated with the temporal bone. So it's oriented just like that. So let's just go back over what we saw here versus what we're seeing here. That make sense? Mm-hmm. Good. So here, this is the petrous portion of the temporal bone. I'm going to turn it around now. Here, this is the mastoid portion here.
Where here?
This is mastoid. All of this is mastoid. So just to correlate, so here you see, we're just oriented just like this. So mastoid, this is squamosal portion here, zygomatic process here, which has been cut, external auditory meatus, which we see here. This is a cartilaginous portion of it. Remember, you have a cartilaginous portion, then you have a bony portion. We're just seeing the bony portion of the ear here, or the temporal bone here. Okay? And then I'm going to turn it around again, and we're going to look at, this is the mastoid portion here, as I mentioned. And for more orientation, this is your internal auditory meatus right here. And if you look at the actual specimen down here, which we can tag on, notice right here, bringing it up, there's your internal auditory meatus right there, right? Mm-hmm. Here it is right here. What's the big deal about that? Well, your seventh nerve and your eighth cranial nerve are entering the temporal bone through the internal auditory or acoustic meatus right here. So if I had a tumorous lesion or what have you in this area here of either one of these nerves, it's going to compromise both nerves for the most part because they're both entering here and it's fairly compact. So you have that. Okay, so other orientation. This is anterior, so this is showing you the internal carotid artery here. Internal carotid artery is coming in from below, and if we just take it back over here for review, there's your carotid canal right there, which would be, see, on the undersurface of this model here. And then we'll see again, the internal carotid artery would be cruising in this area right here, okay, coming up. And so we're starting to see it right here. So this is anterior, and then right here, this is the what you call petrotympanic, not the I said it wrong. Your pharyngotympanic tube or your auditory tube right here coming in anteriorly. And this is the tensor tympani muscle laying on that. Okay, so you have that. So this is your, just moving a little bit, here's your auditory tube, the cartilaginous portion lying on top of that and going into the middle ear. This is your tensor tympani here. So this is that tube that is connecting the nasopharynx with the middle ear. And so sort of keep that in mind because the progression from the nasopharynx through the auditory tube, pharyngotympanic tube, middle ear, and then back into the mastoid ear. So we'll point that out in a bit. Okay, so what else do we need to see on the outside? So if we go around here, this is the middle cranial fossa. So the tegmen tympani would be in this area here. The roof of the middle ear would be right here. So this is middle cranial fossa, so your temporal lobes would be sitting here. So again, if you look at this, see, this is what we're looking at. So here's your middle cranial fossa. The temporal lobes would be sitting in this area right here. So you have that relationship with the tegmen tympani. Then back here, you talked about, remember the venous dural sinuses? Mm-hmm. This is your sigmoid sinus here. So this posterior here. Okay, so we're looking posteriorly right here. Okay? So we got an orientation now. So we know where we are and we have a rough idea of some relationships. Before I go on though, right here, you have two nerves that are associated with the ear and the middle ear. And the one that's lying more medially here, this is your greater petrosal right here. See, so I'm going to rotate it. So there's your greater petrosal there. Here's your lesser petrosal here. Greater petrosal is a branch off of 7. Lesser petrosal is a branch off of 9. Okay, so you have those. So we'll come back to what those are doing in a bit. So we know what the external ear looks like, right? Okay, so we have that. And the temporal bone. This is all temporal bone, remember. So you have all temporal bone. So let's just lift this up, and now we want to look inside. So as I lift this up, see right here, here is the middle ear or tympanic cavity right there, and then this is the roof, or this is the epitympanic recess, or the tegmen tympani is in this area right here. Okay, and so you can see a close relationship again with the middle cranial fossa. So we're looking at the roof, and so move that to one side. And now we're looking at the inner ear, which we see the cochlea, You see the semicircular canals. We're going to remove that, though, so we can look at the middle ear and its relationships. Okay, so let's just take them a little bit at a time. So first of all, we want to look at this structure right here. This, my scissors is lying in the facial canal. So a portion of the facial nerve has been broken off. So remember, looking at this, this is your facial nerve, internal auditory meatus. It enters this facial canal. Okay, so you have that bony canal and the facial nerve running within that. And then at this point right here, what happens, you have the geniculate ganglion right here. And at that point, the seventh nerve gives off the greater petrosal. And the greater petrosal, you know about the importance about it. It's a parasympathetic nerve, and it's preganglionic to the pterygopalatine ganglion. Okay, so you have that. So that's important, you have that there. Then the facial nerve continues along the medial wall here, okay, in the facial canal, and then drops down in the posterior wall. Okay, so we have those relationships. So we know where the facial nerve comes in, we know where the geniculate ganglion is, we know where the greater petrosal comes off and what it does. And then the facial nerve continues on to do the rest of its business in the facial canal along the medial wall and then drops down along the posterior wall. You can see that? Yeah. Good. So I'm going to lift this out now and just sort of follow up on the posterior wall. Okay, so we drop down now in the facial canal, and as the facial nerve drops down, and when I say posterior wall, I mean the posterior wall, excuse me, of the middle ear or the tympanic cavity, right? So we're dropping down in the posterior wall, and as it drops down, the facial nerve gives off a nerve to this structure right here, which is the stapedius muscle, okay, innervated by the seventh nerve, so you can see that nice. So let me just tilt that, there we go. So there's your pyramid, there's the muscle, the stapedius within that, and as the facial nerve drops down, it sends off a branch that innervates that. Okay, and then it continues down, it being the facial nerve on the posterior wall, and gives off this nerve right here. What's that nerve? That's your chorda tympani. Okay, so your chorda tympani is coming off the facial nerve prior to its exit from the temporal bone, and there you see it there, coming off and then going laterally here and anteriorly along the tympanic membrane, and then you see it going between the malleus and the incus here, and then it's going to go into the infratemporal fossa, remember, and it's going to go through that petrotympanic fissure and join the lingual nerve. So the question is, well, what is the chorda tympani doing? Remember, it's doing what? Takes from the anterior 2/3 and preganglionic parasympathetics to the submandibular ganglion. So it joins the lingual nerve to do that, though. So it joins the lingual nerve and is bringing those nerve fiber types to the lingual nerve. So we got that. So that's, oh, an important feature I left out of the posterior wall is this right here. There's an opening here. And you recall what that opening is? Right, good. So that's the adductus here, and that adductus is a communication in the posterior wall to the mastoid air cells. Okay, and so now we can sort of complete. Remember, we talked about the, over here, this is your tympanic, or your pharyngeal tympanic tube over your auditory tube, and so you're coming in anteriorly. That enters anteriorly, and you have this communication through the middle ear, then a communication from the adductus ad natum into the mastoid air cells. So now you see the connection between the nasopharynx and the mastoid air cells. Okay? And the same nerve that innervates the nasopharynx, the ninth nerve, innervates the mucosa all along that pathway. Okay, auditory tube, middle ear, mastoid air cells. So you can see how you can get pain referred from a sore throat to the middle ear. Okay? So we have that. So that's our posterior wall. Okay, good. So what do we want to do next? Well, let's look laterally. So laterally, I'm standing laterally, and I'm standing in the middle ear, and I'm looking laterally. And so what am I going to see? Tympanic membrane, malleus. Okay, I'm going to see incus, and I'm going to see the chorda tympani. Those are the biggies there. Okay, so you have those features associated with the lateral wall. Okay, and then the roof, of course, this is the area of the epitympanic recess right here. So the roof is this area here, is the superior wall. And so basically what you have there is just simply the malleus and the incus extending up into the epitympanic recess, but you have an important relationship with the middle cranial fossa. And so you can see if you had a chronic infection in the middle ear, it can compromise structures within the cranial cavity. So you have, remember, your meninges here, cerebral spinal fluid here. Okay, you have the temporal lobe here. So you can see how an infection could erode this area here, gain access to cerebral spinal fluid because of subarachnoid space, meningitis, and then also you can have an abscess compromising the actual neural tissue. Okay, so you have all of those. So important. So keep the relationships in mind. Why is it a big deal? Okay, so it's important that way. And you're already starting to see the seventh nerve and its importance. Okay, now that's our posterior wall. We've taken care of our lateral wall. Now anteriorly, what do you have? We covered them a little bit. You have your auditory tube coming in, and you have your tensor tympani, and right there, there's the tendon. So you have your tensor tympani right there attaching to the malleus. So you see that? Mm-hmm. Okay, so you have that coming in. Remember the fifth nerve innervates that? So you have that relationship. So you have auditory tube coming in, you have the tensor tympani coming in, and then also this artery right here, the internal carotid, is also an anterior relationship. Okay, so you have that. So those are basic features of the anterior wall. And then the biggie for the floor is you have the jugular bulb down here. So the internal jugular vein would be down in this area here, and you'd have a bulb there. And then also you have, oh, I left it out posteriorly, shame on me. You have the sigmoid sinus here. And so it can be compromised. Okay, so you can have a thrombosis from an infection from the middle area and compromise venous structures here, your sigmoid sinus. So what does that leave? Leaves the medial wall. Okay, so that's a little more complex, but let's just see what we can, let's just put Humpty Dumpty back here now. There. So, you know, on the medial wall now, you're going to have a promontory, you're going to have an elevation for the facial nerve, an elevation for one of the semicircular canals. Those type of things are all going to be on the medial wall, aren't they? Mm-hmm. Okay, so you have, again, one of the semicircular canals, facial nerve, you're going to have see those. And then right here, this is a basal turn of the cochlea. And so if I remove these structures here, notice the stapes, and then notice the round window down here. So I'm going to remove this and then come back to that. So if I tilt this, you see an elevation right there. You see that elevation? That's your promontory. And so the promontory is caused by the basal turn right here, okay, of the cochlea. So you have that. And what's important here, remember the tympanic plexus is on that. And that plexus is from the ninth nerve, and it gives off this nerve right here, which is your lesser petrosal, which is preganglionic, parasympathetic to the otic ganglion and the parotid secretions. So your mind should start working, oh my goodness, all kinds of crazy things are in this area that can be compromised. So sort of think, know what they are, and then what do they do, and then you would know what the deficit could be. All right, so what else do you have in the medial wall? Well, we sort of, right here, there's our oval window from the stapes, and then we've got this one down here. There's your round window right there. Okay, so you get that reciprocal movement. So each movement of the stapes, you have a membrane here, you get a corresponding movement, right? Because of compression of the fluid, and so something has to give.
Does the fluid come out? No, right? It's just,
say it again?
the fluid comes out, or it's just the membrane, right?
It's just a membrane there, right? So you have to have, remember, it's all fluid, it's compressing fluids, and so something has to give. And so that membrane serves as that relief, if you will. Okay, so that takes care of your medial wall. So if you have a good idea of what's on those walls, if you have a good idea what the relationships are, if you have a good idea of communication from nasal pharynx to mastoid air cells, okay, those are type of questions you should expect to see that type. So what if I'm standing there and pretend I'm standing in the middle ear and I look lateral, what do I see? If I look medial, what do I see? How do I get from the tympanic cavity into the mastoid air cells? What does that communicate with anteriorly, the cranial, those type of things, okay? And then know what those structures do, and you should be fine, okay? Good. So that's a quick trip through our ear. Okay?
Yeah.
You got all that?
Yeah.
Now are you ready?